All right, and we are live.
Guys are going to be video, right? Oh, there's Todd.
We are live and they can now all see you.
Well, Darren, are you staying just the black and white logo the whole time?
I'm not, but we just dropped off Todd, I think. To 0 for 2 right now. All right, guys, well, welcome to our Facebook Live for tonight. We're trying some new things. And we just lost Todd, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Just a reminder for everybody, we have a call to prayer that will be this Tuesday. And next Sunday night, we will have a members meeting during this period of time. And that will be a Zoom meeting. And so just a reminder about that.
Both those will be Zoom meetings. So people can, I know for some folks who come to Call to Prayer every month, that's be a little change, but for others maybe who've not experienced it before, you can join us on Zoom. We'll put the information out there, and we'll have a church-wide prayer time on Tuesday night. It's going to be great.
And we'll get started with some questions. One second.
We lost Todd.
Yeah, we lost Todd.
So he was supposed to be our host tonight. So I don't.
This is a great start. Here he comes.
Oh, here. Technology is great.
Like if it all worked correctly when you thought it would. We're getting there. Todd, I saw we dropped you.
Yeah, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
All right, I think my internet crashed. I'm sorry.
It's all good.
So I have no idea where we are because I couldn't see anything.
All we were doing was killing time and building an audience for you.
Oh, good. Oh, good. So do you want me to start, or did y'all already start?
We warmed up the crowd. We just told everybody, hey, Tuesday night Call to Prayer and Sunday night at 7 members meeting. Both will be on Zoom.
Awesome. Awesome. Did we also tell them about Passion Week ideas that are on YouTube? So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see some Passion Week ideas. Obviously, it's a little different this year with not being in person, but we want to make sure we put the emphasis on Easter and this Holy Week we're in. So check that out on YouTube, SSBC Jax.
And you've got you creating a virtual Easter egg hunt. I saw. What?
Yeah, and I don't know if virtual's the right word. DIY may be the right word. Do it yourself. So we're just trying to give you all the resources you need that you can do. Obviously, we can't have more than 10 people together, that you can do a little Easter egg hunt with your family and maybe one neighbor. So you don't have to go out and look for it. We're going to drop it all right there. And then we do have a little video with the gospel message that you can watch together as a family. It's actually on the main Southside's Facebook as an event.
Awesome. Hey, you've done a great job with just next gen material. I mean, I don't know, it's not just you got folks helping you, other team members, but man, the stuff for our kids and teens and everything's been awesome. You guys put this all together so fast and just did a great job. Thanks for all that.
Well, thank you. As you said, it's a team effort. I did wonder if I'd get fired for sock puppet theater, but we'll see where that goes. All right, guys. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. If you have any questions, please type those in. Both Darren and myself are watching the Facebook Live. So if you have questions, type those in. But Gary, I'm going to go ahead and start off with a question for you. Obviously we're in the pause series, and we're looking to this morning specifically. We looked at the need for prayer, the need to stay awake, and maybe slow down a little bit. But I want to kind of take us in a different direction and work back to it. And something we've talked about already. And, if you Google right now, God and Corona, there's a lot of connections that are being made there. So I would just like to hear, if somebody walked up to you, Gary, and said, I believe this is God's wrath on the world, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think obviously it's always dangerous when we speculate and try to speak for God. And I certainly wouldn't do that. I just think the best I can do in terms of understanding who God is and how he operates in the world today is to look at the example that he gave us when he took on flesh and lived with us. And that was Jesus. If we want to know how he operates, if we want to know how we should operate, we look to Jesus. And I just didn't see Jesus walking around, casting viruses on people. I saw him healing people. That's the testimony that you see. A lot of the folks that I'm reading and hearing, probably the same ones you've read about or heard about, I just say, read John chapter 9, where the disciples come across a man who is born blind, and the disciples say, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? And Jesus says, neither one. Basically, you guys don't get it. It's not that way, but God be glorified. And then he heals the man. I just think that's a picture. So I think disease, natural disasters all come about as a result of living in a fallen and a broken world. It is a consequence of sin, absolutely. And in that regard, yes, it is a judgment. But it is basically like anything else that you do. You decide to violate a law or something of natural order, and there are consequences that come as a result of that. That could be prevented, of course, but sin has run rampant, and sin has broken not just people, but relationships, and not just human relationships, but even our relationship with nature, the natural order. And so I believe that's a consequence of sin. And so as a result of that, God steps in and he does miraculous things, and he brings beauty out of ashes. And so, also Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, I cause my sun to shine on the evil and the good, and my rain to fall on the just and the unjust. So everybody, regardless of whether they're good or evil, just or unjust, is going to get blessings, are going to experience God's blessings, and they're going to experience droughts and hard times too. It happens. It's just a part of being in the natural world we live in. So I know there are many people, and some of whom I really respect theologically, who would say, no, this is God's judgment. That's just not my position on it. It's not where I stand on it. And I think that, I just kind of go with the example Jesus gives, and I feel pretty safe with that.
And we've talked about God will use it, but there's a difference in that. So hanging with there, I want to go right to a question somebody submitted, and I think it relates to what you just said. How do we know we're not in the end times? What would you say as far as, reading Ezekiel and Revelation and people making that jump and saying, no, this has got to be it? Well, how would you speak to that?
Well, I would caution folks who would jump to that conclusion. Of course, it could be. Let me just say that my same argument about that can be used the other way too. And it is, people throughout history, earnest followers of Jesus, have thought throughout history that everything they were experiencing was evidence of the end times. There have been other plagues and viruses far worse than this one. I know that seems hard to believe, but far worse than this one. And there have been wars and rumors of war. Jesus said there would be those things. But he said, I don't even know when the end will come. That's something that my Father knows. And in his capacity as being incarnate, he limited himself even in terms of the knowledge that he had, that there were certain things, that's evidence. There were certain things that, that he didn't know. And so he said, the Son of Man doesn't even know that. So I would just caution and say, hey, I wouldn't worry too much about it. In fact, I would say if you are worried about it, maybe that's more evidence that you should draw closer to the Lord and make sure your salvation, your faith is secure. Because, as Christians, we should live as if every day were the final day. We should live every day as if, God could call us home, or Jesus could return. And as Christians, we should look forward to that day. That should be a day that we anticipate and long for, not a day we fear. So if there's fear involved in it, then I would just encourage folks, hey, use this time. If God is something that you feel out of sync with, use this time. Let that anxiety drive you towards him, not away from him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's focusing on what if it is the end times? How should that change our approach as Christians? Realistically, it shouldn't. it shouldn't change how we live. And I think even in my life, when was I the most afraid of it being the end times? I think first was like all the Left Behind stuff was going on. But really, when that was all happening too, I knew I didn't have a relationship with God. And so I was so focused on the end times and was it here, was it not here? Because I didn't know where I stood with God. And so even using that thought of, is this the end times? Do a little self-reflection and say, why am I so concerned if it is the end times? Is it because I have a friend and they may not go to heaven for that eschatological view? Possibly, but if that's the case, then there's something you should do right now. Regardless if it's the end of times or if it's not, you have a reason to do, and just use it as a self-reflection question to say, why are you so anxious about it being the end of times?
Hey, Darren, that's a great point. I would even add to that, there are people who are facing death, not just now because of coronavirus, but always facing death. It is the end time for them.
Right.
And that will come for all of us. That's part of what's really, I guess, got my mind really turning right now is people's utter terror when it comes to their own mortality, the utter fear about their death. As believers, that should not be our greatest fear. That is not our greatest fear. And so I think that's something else to explore. But the reality is people who may be suffering or who may pass away, for them, it is the end times. And it is important to think about, hey, where are they with God? Where are they in their confidence in their faith walk? So that's a great point.
Yeah. And you mentioned there have been worse plagues. The bubonic plague or Black Death killed 1/3 of the European population at the time. So, yes, this is terrible, but there have been far worse, as you mentioned. I just say I used to have a high school chaplain. I went to a private Christian high school, and my high school chaplain would hear like we were going to see a movie that was, action and gory and stuff. And he'd look at us and say, "Hey, what if Jesus came back when you were watching that movie?" And I was like, well, I guess we'd miss the second half. I mean, if you're right with the Lord, what does it matter? But that's not the reaction he wanted, obviously. Hey, keep posting your questions here. Kevin, I see you here. You says, and it's a great question. Given this morning's sermon, if Peter came up short, what hope do we have?
Man, that's a great question and a great point. And I think it's really one of the reasons why I personally find so much comfort and encouragement in the Gospels, because they do not sugarcoat or dress up the disciples at all. They show them in all their frailty and all their humanity. They show them with all their flaws. And in fact, I would flip that question and say, because we see how messed up they were, that should give us hope for ourselves. Because really they're just men and women just like all of us, and they had their doubts and they failed just like everybody else. So I think it's actually very encouraging, at least I find it very encouraging and comforting, that the gospel writers didn't try to make them look like, porcelain figures that glowed in the dark with halos over them. But they weren't that way at all. They were very raw, very real. They're falling asleep as Jesus is sweating drops of blood in the garden, and he begs them, guys, will you please just keep watch for me for an hour? And they won't do it. They don't do it. And then of course, Peter's monumental failure right after that, when he denies Jesus 3 times. Jesus had even warned him, you're going to do this. And then he can't stay awake in the garden, and then he turns around and fails. And I think that's really the warning that I took from this as I was reading this in this passage. I'm like, if I fail to pray, if I fail to watch and pray now, there could be a greater failure coming. If the church fails to watch and pray during the coronavirus, we may be setting ourselves up for a greater failure for whatever comes next. And I just want to say, that's why I think this is so urgent, that during this time, we can speculate about the end times. It's an interesting conversation. We can debate about, did God cause it? Did God allow it? The distinctions between God's sovereignty. That's an interesting conversation. But I think the important conversation, the critical conversation right now is, what is the church doing with this time that God has given us? We need to be watching and praying, because I think that's the invitation that Jesus is giving us. And because we don't know what could be next. And the only way we'll know, the only way we'll be ready is if we watch and pray.
Right. And we also see, in Matthew 4, when Jesus himself is tempted in the wilderness, when he's tempted, he still stands. I mean, this is the Son of God who was in heaven with God before he came down to earth, and he still stands on scripture to make sure he's not making bad decisions or going the wrong way. So I agree with pray, stay watching. And one of the ways we do that is through studying and knowing the scripture.
Absolutely.
So we got another question here. It says, you mentioned spiritual sedatives this morning. That was an awesome point, by the way. How God is removing many of these during this pandemic. If not dealt with correctly, can we just replace one sedative with another, or just go right back to our sedatives when this is over?
I mean, that's a great point, and so true. Yes, absolutely. It happens with addicts all the time. And, I know when we think about binge watching Netflix or, social media, just scrolling social media all the time, we don't necessarily put that in the same category. But in fact, research scientists are saying it's got the same effect, so if you are simply substituting one addiction for another, that is not ultimately going to be bring about your freedom. You're not going to ultimately experience what God has for you. You're just substituting. So I would totally agree. I think we've got to be careful during this time not to just substitute one sedative for another. And yes, I do think when this is over, you could not only go back to your old habits and old patterns of life really quickly, but you could go back and they could be even worse when this is over. There's a story that Jesus told in the scripture about a man who was possessed by a demon. And, basically the demon got exorcised, and it searched around for a place to land and came back, and it invited 7 of its demon brothers. I think that's the right number to come in with it, because it found the man's, basically mind, soul, swept clean. So in fact, I think that parable is teaching, hey, be careful, because you can exorcise one demon and only make room for more to come and take its place. I think that's a really great point that we should be thinking about. And another reason why whatever we're engaged in this period of time should be used to set new patterns, not just a temporary fix for the coronavirus, but new patterns that we adopt and maintain long after Corona's over.
Yeah, and I think just through that whole process, you could end up taking a sedative that you have right now, and then when you go back into the real world, just add that sedative back in, and you're for the worse at that point. And I think we're at a place in American culture to where there's not a stigma around the different sedatives anymore. So it used to be to where like alcohol was the big thing, or something like pornography may be a big thing that was like a sedative to take you away. But nowadays, there are just so many sedatives that exist, between media, from movies to Netflix to video games to still drinking, and all that stuff is still all there. And I think what's important there is there's not this cultural negativity about all those things anymore. It's kind of just accepted now. So you have to take stands and moral stands and be comfortable with it on why you take that. There's more of an ownership on us to be strong. And I think that's what differentiates something like this time now versus maybe where it was 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, and another point to that too is that we, right now with what's going on, we are living on social media. We are living online. Everything is being done online, which again, huge blessing right now. But the enemy will take that and use it, because your addiction and craving for this sort of not real community, I mean, it's the best we can do right now, you are exercising that over and over again and developing a new habit. So if you came into coronavirus without an addiction to social media and the internet and being online all the time, you may come out of it with it. Or if you came into it already struggling with that, it's only being reinforced. So I think that's another thing to look at. Again, we couldn't even be doing church right now if it weren't for it. So don't hear me say it's evil. I'm just saying the enemy takes things that are amoral and can use them for our destruction in the same way that God is using it right now for something good. So that requires us to be very watchful and mindful and prayerful about how we're responding.
Yeah, it's that idea, you said it, like it's amoral things, but if we're overindulging in it, we're letting it take root and become an idol in our lives. Right. That's really what we have to watch out for.
And I'll just say one more thing just on the addiction side too, and the substitute. Ultimately what you have to do is get underneath what is the longing or itch that is there that you are trying to satisfy with whatever the addiction is. Now that addiction, obviously we're talking about social media, binge watching Netflix, pornography, drinking, drugs, whatever. If you don't get to the root cause underneath it, you will always just find something else to try to medicate it. So one of the things during the pause, I think, is to invite the Holy Spirit to get underneath whatever those addictions are, to say, God, what causes me to want to just, watch hours of The Office or hours of, whatever your favorite preferred Netflix binge is, or what is causing me, why do I have to have 1, 2, 3, 4 glasses of wine, when I get home at the end of the day? What is that ache, that longing, and how can Jesus satisfy or mend or heal whatever that pain is, that wound is, so that you don't have to depend on other temporary fixes for it?
And what's an interesting thing is, you mentioned the Great Awakenings this morning. In the second Great Awakening, studies have shown 3 to 4 months after people had left town, churches actually declined. They did not sustain the increase, and pregnancy went up, which I don't know if that was related. But if we don't take this time and it's just a temporary fix, it doesn't stay with us. Very good point, but both of you. Hey, great question here from Peggy. Peggy says, when each of you pause to spend quiet time with the Lord, what do each of you do to quiet your minds? We were talking about this earlier. Is there a technique or a constant practice that helps you to focus in, stay focused, not let things run through your mind? And then she adds, 10 minutes is a struggle at times, much less an entire hour, which, Peggy, trust me, we're with you on that. What would you say?
Well, I would say that, like anything else that requires discipline, it will take practice. So 10 minutes may be a struggle. So start with 1 minute, and then in that minute, or you stretch it to 2. Think about this. If we are in this social distancing for 30 days, and none of us really know how long, but you can add a minute a day for 30 days and get up to praying or meditating for 30 minutes a day. Just by adding 1 minute a day, set a timer on your phone. It's hard. I think there are lots of techniques over the time. I know Darren has just recently finished with a group, the Foster book on disciplines. So I know he'll probably have some things that Foster adds to that. But I would say that one of the things you do is, or that I do, is I just try to clear my mind, not in sort of the Eastern transcendental way, but in a way that just makes room for God to speak. So there's an ancient custom of just a breath prayer where I breathe in and I say out loud, or in my mind, I would say, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as I take the air in, and then I breathe out, have mercy on me, a sinner, and I'm exhaling. And I do that repeatedly for a little while. And then sometimes I'll just sit and I'll try very hard to inventory what are all those random thoughts running around in my mind. And here's the mistake I used to make. I used to be disappointed in myself because of the random thoughts. And then somewhere along the line, I read one of the spiritual fathers who made a comment about not fighting them, but inventorying them and see what God may want to say to you through those things. In other words, okay, God, I'm laying this for, why am I so worried about fill in the blank, health, or this person, or a relationship, or money, or whatever it is. And then you actually turn that anxious thought, that worry, that what you think is a distraction, and you take it captive, like it says in the scripture that we take every thought captive, make it obedient to Christ, and you actually convert it into a prayer. And that will take time, and it just is going to require some focus. I think praying through the Psalms is one of the best things that I have done personally to learn how to pray, is just reading the Psalm over and over again, slowly, thoughtfully, and letting it focus my thoughts too. So I'd be interested to see, Darren, I know you've read the Foster book pretty recently, if you got some other thoughts of your own or things that he adds.
Yeah, so Foster really begins with these first 2 nights that we're talking about here. And really he begins this idea of prayer and how do you quiet your mind with the idea of meditation. And when I first started reading the book, I remember with the accountability group, I just sat there and thought, it's interesting. I started with meditation, but really he used meditation to set up prayer. And so how do you quiet your mind? That idea, and Gary hit it around the head, that idea of just meditation and really focusing on, and you even mentioned it in that idea of the breath prayer, focusing on kind of the supremacy of God or just his holiness, right? And so you're elevating who God is and letting that kind of quiet your mind. Because oftentimes when I begin prayers and I start out with my stresses or my needs or my worries, and I don't want people to feel like if you begin a prayer like that, you're beginning it bad. Like I grew up in a very legalistic kind of a church and I always felt like if I didn't do it properly, that I was doing it badly. And I think that that's a horrible way of just trying to start habits. But I think one of the better things that Foster does is highlighting this idea of meditation, elevating God. So then that kind of puts you in a right place to realize who you are, where you are. And then that helps even put your struggles and your concerns and your fears in a better place as well. So really that's, and honestly, the way he, Foster, in that Celebration of Discipline book, highlights things is this is the beginning. He looks at these meditation and prayer as the inner disciplines that really set up the other disciplines that he aligns. And I think he did that purposefully. Let's focus on these two ideas, focus on our relationship and our connection with God, and then let that influence everything else. It's why in Ephesians, Paul talks about how the Holy Spirit and, focus on being filled with these spirits so we don't get filled with other spirits. And there he was specifically talking about alcohol, but I think you could replace that with every other sedative that we already talked about. How you overcome that is through that proper relationship and keeping that relationship healthy, keeping that perspective healthy over who you are and where you are.
Yeah, and I would just say too, Peggy, if I was going to go out today, I could have the best intentions to walk up my house right now and run a marathon, but I ain't doing it, right? You got to train, and it's not that you don't have enough faith. You got to train that and realize there's somebody who doesn't want you praying. So 10 minutes is just awesome start. Sometimes it's like 2 minutes, I'm done. Squirrel, shoot. So, hang in there and realize it is something you work toward. It is a discipline. I love what Gary and Darren said, but it is a discipline and you're going to have to work toward it. And it's not just going to come naturally. But speaking of that, by the way, didn't Caitlin kill that prayer this morning?
Man.
Oh my gosh, that was awesome. Sorry, didn't mean to get off track, but that was cool. All right.
Hey, Todd, one other thing I would say is, prayer is good for me. And I don't know other people, this may reveal more about my spirituality or lack of it, but I can't start with prayer. I have to start with some reading. Mm-hmm. So the Psalms or a devotional or something that gives me just a moment to sort of detox and focus my mind. If I try to go straight to prayer, I am all over the place. So I would just say if that's an issue for you, don't feel like you failed because you start out by reading the Bible first. I mean, breathe a prayer, God, show me something in the Word today, and then get into the Word. Or, Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest, or, Morning and Evening by Spurgeon, something that's gonna sort of get you in the right frame of mind, and then pray. That may be another trick.
And even just incorporating it to something that's part of your life, right? Like if you do a walk in the morning, I think this was in the Foster book, but like as you're walking around, using what's around you to motivate and fuel your prayer. And so using those things, using something that you already are doing to motivate your prayers that are going on. And I think that helps you too, to get to that place where it's pray without ceasing, is feeling like you can just start a conversation with God in the middle of things, or just the minute you're stressed, just start a conversation with God at that point, just to center yourself too on who he is and what he is. And guys, thanks for the questions. You guys are doing awesome on the questions today. But one thing that Cheryl said, I think ties right into this, because kind of the idea of how do you set up the quiet place in your mind. Sometimes having the positive peer pressure is a good thing too. And so she said, having an accountability partner, does it make a difference if the relationship is long distance, a phone contact only? If it's a preferred one-on-one, is it a scheduled time to meet? I would say through all those, having a schedule time is probably the most important, right? Building it into a routine. And for us, we do it once a week. The day that we do it is really, there's about two options that we'll do it. We'll either do it on Thursdays or we'll do it on Saturdays. But just having those boundaries and establishing those boundaries with whoever your accountability partner or just small group of maybe, I don't know, ours is about 4, and I would say that's probably about a max if I include myself. Just having that schedule time, although having a larger group is good too, because even if one person can't make it, it keeps that routine up. So, but I don't know if face-to-face versus the others is necessarily more preferred. I'll let you guys hit on that. I don't think it particularly matters as much as building it into your rotation and then having the idea that you guys are just going to be open and honest with each other is probably the more important things than the mode of it.
Well, I will say that mine is not local, so it's always been over phone since I graduated from seminary. Actually, same person, and so we do have set times, and we do have set opportunities that we meet over phone or over FaceTime. And the cool thing too is if you're doing it that way, you also set up an opportunity where if they don't hear from you, they know to reach out and find out what's going on. Where, if it's here locally, obviously you don't show up, people know, but getting busy is not an excuse. You have to make that call and stay connected. So I think both work. It's just what's best for you and what you feel will keep you on track better.
Yeah, and I think multiples is okay. Having multiple accountability partners, maybe for different aspects of your walk and journey, is good. I think the more accountability we have, the better we are. That's not to say that you diminish it in terms of quality. I just think having people like that in your life who have the freedom to ask about those things is really important for all of us.
Yeah, I think another important point there too on accountability, sorry, Todd, is make sure it's of the same sex or gender, whatever. Make sure that it is it's the same sex, just because opening yourself up really opens up a relationship. And if you're meeting with somebody who's of the opposite sex, you can get yourself into a world of trouble very quickly. Making sure you have somebody to where if you're married, you can have a marriage conversation with and allow them to speak into your marriage too. And like I said, that doesn't work well if it's a member of the opposite sex, because you can really very quickly, the devil will use that to get you in trouble. So just be careful there.
So we got one here, and I love this because we've been bouncing this conversation around a lot in our staff lately, but to put it on the air, I think it's good for everybody here. It says, once this is over, our church will have discovered capabilities to reach church members and the unchurched. We may look back at this pandemic and realize that it opened our eyes to more creative ways to spread the gospel. Your thoughts?
I hope that's true. I hope that's true. And I think the only way that it's going to be true, and the only way that we're going to ultimately know for sure what those things are and which ones are truly of God and which ones are just, us getting excited about technology or something different, is if we are taking a pause and watching and praying and really seeking after God during this time. What are we doing that's working and effective? What were we doing that maybe was just out of desperation? And then sort that out and begin to pray. I know, we, and a lot of this is thanks to you two guys and the staff and other leaders, volunteers in our church. We mobilized so quickly to establish digital platforms and programs. I mean, we moved so fast. Now, I think God was preparing us in many ways. I can look back and see that God was putting things in place for us to do that. But I still think it's important as we go through this, we have to pray and evaluate all those things. Some of those things are, at the end of the time, maybe not going to be effective. And we can't just assume that everything that we're doing right now is going to be a new way of doing things. It could just be for a season. It could be a fundamental change. I just don't know that we will know that unless we're truly engaging with the Holy Spirit during this time.
Yeah, and going back to this idea of one of our Discovering Southside membership class things is we value people over programs. And so everything we are doing now to be online is a program. The idea of community is not, but the idea of using Zoom to create a community is a program. The idea of having a worship service is not, but live streaming and posting it on is a program. And even posting it via Facebook is a program. And so you're looking at it and saying, okay, we value the relationships with people more than the programs. And so I think you just have to give time. You have to keep trying after we get back. I think a large part of that depends on our people too. Going back to Lauren's, the beginning of his question there, talking about once it's over, we have new techniques, new capabilities to reach church members and the unchurched. I think a big part there is once this is over, are we going to continue to reach the unchurched with these methods? And if we don't, then I think, I don't know, I'm just of the side that I think a lot of what we should do should be focused towards the unchurched. And if this isn't helpful for us to evangelize, then why are we doing it? Are we just spinning our wheels? And we have to really be reflective about that.
Well, and I'll just throw this out, and this is going to sound a little harsh, but I think it's true. If you weren't interested in reaching unchurched people with the gospel before, you will not be interested in reaching unchurched people with the gospel after. I just, maybe people will have an awakening moment, and it will be a life-changing event for them individually, and I pray that's true. But my experience has been that people, a new gadget, a new toy, a new program almost never brings about the sort of change people make it out to be. So I would say it's an issue of the heart that, yes, if we open up new platforms that engage people, then by all means, let's do it. And we are actually having some really interesting conversations right now about that. We're having some great conversations right now about what does it look like if they come back and say, okay, you can meet, but it needs to be 50 or less. What does it look like if we come back and culture has changed and people don't want to meet in big group settings? You think about the terrorist attacks and now, viruses. I mean, we are wearing away our culture's desire to get together in large groups. What's that going to do to the church long term? So I think we're having some interesting conversations about networks of house churches and using technology, and we'll move forward with all of that. But I will say our heart to reach people with the gospel is going to be whatever it is, regardless of the technology that's available to us. And so that's really, again, where we have to check our own hearts and say, if I wasn't sharing with people before, am I doing it now? Now, I've heard people right now who are inviting friends to online worship who never invited them to physical campus. That's great. That is great. I'm doing more of it. I found myself sending the links to people that I would have never called up and said, hey, will you come to church with me Sunday? So in that regard, I think it is good, and we ought to keep doing it.
Yeah, and I think looking at this and what we were talking pretty much the first week of this, of the fact that the world's going to come to a new normal. But it was interesting watching, I think I was watching CNN or something the other day, and CNN started talking about the new normal that will happen in society after this. And it's one thing when we're talking about it, in a church world, then we start hearing kind of news talking about the fact that this is all going to be new post this. It just kind of hit home that, I think it's hard for us to know what the world will look like after this right now. And again, going back to the only person who does is really God. And so that's where the dependency on prayer, the dependency and trust on God, highlighting things to us. And I'll even say from our congregation, this is something I have loved this past week, is hearing the stories back from our church members of the things that they're doing and how they're trying to reach others and what they're doing to help others in the midst of this. I just want to do a call out to all those who are doing things, but also if you feel like God is leading you to do something or to say something or to do something new, investigate that, look for that, start doing that, because that's really the key. It's about the heart, and it's about what is the Holy Spirit leading us to do as a church. But I don't want it to just be us as a church staff. It's what is the church leading the priesthood of the believers? What is the church leading all of the church to do at this time to reach out? And it's those little things that just add up over time.
Mm-hmm. And I think I could speak for all of us. We want to use whatever lessons God is teaching us, and we want to follow the Holy Spirit. But we also realize the heart of Christianity is the Christian community. And though this is great that we can do this virtually, it still hurts not to be together with people. So that's got to be the center of all we do. And the message of we can reach them, however, but we've got to bring them into Christian community because that's where you're truly transformed and changed. So I have where'd it go? I've lost it real quick. All right, here it goes. So question here from Eric. It says, he quotes Psalm 91:19. If you say the Lord is my refuge and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. Great verse. But why do we still fear? Why does our faith seem weak? Does it indicate that we may not be saved? How do answer this to new believers during this time, or old ones find themselves in struggle with faith? And I think this is kind of something we can relate this to Peter, James, and John in this morning's gospel lesson. They were standing with the Messiah, yet they were weak in their faith. But how would you answer that, Gary? Or what would you say to that? Speak to that.
I would say, well, I love that verse, first of all.
Yeah.
And I would say the number one command in scripture is do not be afraid. I don't know if this count is right, but it sure sounds good that there are 365 times that we're commanded in scripture not to be afraid. I've never counted them all myself. I've just spouted that number because it's certainly convenient that it's one for every day. At some point I should probably count it and just verify it, but it's a lot. I mean, we'd all agree it's a lot. It pervades Old and New Testament, that command. The reason it's in there so much is because there is a lot to be afraid of. It's just, and so I think, we should be mindful that the reason we may be afraid is because there are legitimate things to fear, except that we know that those of us who are in the Lord, we have nothing to fear. That whether it's coronavirus, whether it's losing our livelihood through an economic downturn, losing a loved one, losing our own life, our hope is in the Lord. And it doesn't mean that we won't be affected by those difficult things, but it does mean that our confidence is assured in Him. And so we can live with confidence now, but all of us will face fear. Fear is actually something, it's an emotion that God gave us for our own protection. But it's interesting, in scripture, the only thing that we are told to fear is to fear the Lord. And that fear, the way it's used in the Bible, is really more of an awe or reverence. It's the kind of fear that I used to have for my mom when I knew that I hadn't done what I should do and that she was going to make it right. She was going to bring some righteousness into our house, because and it was never in a way that was to harm me. It was always for my good and for my protection. But I had a healthy fear for my mom. And I think that's the kind of fear we're told to have a fear, a reverence, an awe, a respect for God. And if we have that, we have nothing else to fear.
And I think, to your point, like there's a lot to be afraid of. And even your point there that we don't fear as Christians because of God, like those are two very profound truths. First, as humans, there's a lot in this world that are more powerful than us. Like nature is more powerful than us. We're seeing that right now. Kingdoms are more powerful than any individual. When you look at it, even, the story of the 7 sons of Sceva, right? Like there's a point to where the devil is more powerful than a human being on their own. And it's understanding that there's a lot to be afraid of, because in our sinful state without Christ, there's a lot of things that we should be afraid of, but it's only through God that we have that protection. And so really focusing that as Christians, we're constantly kind of battling the idea of the flesh versus kind of who we are in Christ, and understanding that we don't fear because of who God is. Like God is the thing that protects us. God is the thing that helps us to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. And I loved I forget who it was recently that said that means we have to walk through the valley of the shadow and death. Like you will walk through the valley of the shadow and death. That's what that verse is saying in its connotation. It's just we will fear no evil because God is with us. And so always being aware of that.
And I was just thinking about that too. When my kid, just to Eric's point about new believers, who are struggling with fear right now. When my kids were little, they didn't get in trouble because they were afraid. Like I didn't chastise them because they were afraid. I didn't embarrass them because they were afraid. I comforted them when they were afraid. I encouraged them when they were afraid. I assured them when they were afraid. So I think for us to remember that if we're afraid, we have a loving Father who wants to comfort and reassure us. And so I think that would be a good reminder for all of us right now to press in towards the Lord with those fears.
Yeah. I love Jeremiah 1, where Jeremiah is being called and there is some fear and trepidation. And God reminds him, it's like, those people they can't do close to you what I can. And I got your back. And I just love the way God kind of outlines that. Don't worry about them. For me, I joke, God saying, I'm the big dog. Don't forget what you got in your backyard. So, hey, I know we're butting up against time, but Casey just had a great question. I definitely want to answer this one. It says, too often it seems taboo for Christians to admit they struggle with prayer. I'll admit it, Casey. What are some ways that you have struggled in your prayer life, and how do you push through? And I'll jump right in there just to diffuse that bomb. Casey, I can tell you in my ministry and my career, more times than I'd like to admit, I have talked about God more than I've talked to God. And I've taken that as a substitute. And even reading books about God, but not speaking to him. And, like Gary said, I'm the same way. I can't just jump into prayer. I like to read or do something to kind of center myself. And sometimes I'd get so focused in what I was reading that when it was time for prayer, it's like, oh man, I only got a minute. All right, God, you know what I need. And literally, like, I'm going to bed. And so I've really had to focus and say, no one can drink out of an empty well. And if I'm not allowing God to fill me through prayer, then I can't go help anybody else. And I've got to spend more time talking to him than talking about him. And so I've really had to just challenge and push myself and realize, no, it is not okay that I just read a book about God. I've got to talk to him. They don't equate, So, it's been a struggle throughout ministry. I'll be the first to admit that.
Yeah, I'll second that. And I'll go even a step further and say, of all the spiritual disciplines, prayer is the one that I have always felt the most inadequate, where I have felt the most inadequate. I, at my very best, have still felt like I am not taking full advantage of the gift that has been given to me in terms of just approaching the throne of God, having the Holy Spirit in me, dwelling in me. I just don't feel like I've ever been there. And then I've taken great comfort from that, though, in knowing that it's one of those things that the more you do it, the more you want to do it, the more you realize how far there is to go in it. And so I don't know that you ever feel like your prayer life arrives. I think the most godly men and women that I've known in my life, who I looked at them and really thought, man, those are men and women who pray. And they would always say, when you'd say, hey, if you could have a conversation, say, well, what's one spiritual discipline or one thing you wish you could do better? They'd always say prayer. Prayer is the thing. So I just don't let the enemy discourage you into thinking that, well, you're just a failure at this. I think that it's one of those things, the more you do it, it's like a muscle you exercise, but at the same time, you will more and more realize how much farther you have to go. It's similar to, when I was in middle school, I knew everything. I knew everything. Just ask my parents or my siblings. I knew everything. I knew all the answers. And then the older I've gotten, the more I realize I know nothing. And I think prayer is the same way. Early in your faith, you might think, I got this prayer thing down. And then I think the longer you walk with Jesus, the more you realize, man, I've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think right there was a struggle in my prayer life. I think the two struggles that continually occur are, number one, the feeling like I'm not hearing from God. And usually that's a symptom that there's something else in my spiritual journey that I am not, that I'm weak at. And And so it's evident through the prayer life, but really that's just a symptom of a deeper issue. So I think that's the first part where I struggle. I think the second part where I struggle is honestly whenever things aren't working out the way that I see, or I feel like God has promised that they will. And I always kind of get weird about God's promises, but really looking in and, when I have struggles in life, when I have struggles, with things going on or situations in life, or when I do have struggles in marriage, even when I see that and I feel like, okay, God, this isn't what you want in life. This isn't, your purpose. So why is this happening? I feel like I'm trying to, live life with you, but then what's going on there? I think that when I'm at those points is really where my prayer, and I'm just like, what's going on? And so I feel like I hit a wall, but I think how you push through that is that idea of fear of God, right? That the fear of the Lord helps you to push through it. It's my fear of thinking that God is in control. And so I can talk to him. I can approach him. I can debate him and just talk openly. Like I can go back to the promises that I feel like I'm citing, where I feel like God has promised that this should happen in my life. And even say it back to God, like, God, you promised this. I feel like you promised this. Tell me if you didn't, but I feel like this is what's there. And kind of just reciting back some of the promises of God, even in that prayer, helps me at those points in times to figure out, is that promise real, or am I just reading this wrong? Did I hear God incorrectly? And so even using that as a way of trying to push through it is just having that trust and that faith that God is in control. And there's a guy who I love to death. It's a philosopher. Don't pick up this book if you're not really ready to get into it. But Alvin Plantinga is a guy who's up in Notre Dame, and he's a professor up there. And he talks about foundationalism, and that at our roots, we have a foundation that everything else in our life is built off of. And I think we have to look and say, okay, what is that foundation of my life? Is that foundation my own self-experiences, and everything in life is based off of my own self-experience? Or is that foundation based off of God's word and his promises in my relationship with him? And really, God is the foundation of my life, because how you answer that question determines how you pray oftentimes. If it's about experience, then what you're experiencing now is what life is. If your life is based off of God, then there's a difference there. What you're experiencing right now may not be how it's going to be. And you can rest assured in God, and that he will help carry things through to where they're supposed to go.
That's awesome. So guys, I know we are pushing up against it. We've been almost an hour already, and it looks like we have answered all the questions. So are there any thoughts as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I would just encourage everybody, join us Tuesday night, 7 p.m. It'll be a Zoom meeting for Call to Prayer. We really just want to take some time to just earnestly seek the Lord in prayer, and it's a little different format, but hope you'll join us. We do it first Tuesday night of every month for a long time, so we're going to continue that. Just do it on Zoom, and then next Sunday night at 7 p.m. Don't forget, again, it'll be a Zoom meeting, membership meeting, important membership meeting. We've just faced some challenges during this separation, and we've got to call everybody. Trustees want to call everybody together just to deal with one particular item, and we just need we need as many members in that meeting as we can get.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate. Last thought is to call to prayer. I love being at Southside because I love going to those call to prayers, and I don't attend every month, but I try to go every other month at the very least. But one of the ways to learn how to pray is to be with other people who are prayer warriors. And one of the great things, and I know Cheryl's been all up in this conversation on Facebook, like she is a godly woman who prays. Dolores is a godly woman who prays. Melanie Elkins, who's usually always there, she's a godly woman who prays, and they will help you kind of seeing how they pray. I know Eric was on here. Eric prays his heart every time he prays. Chaz is an amazing prayer warrior, and I don't think a lot of people see that in Chaz, but Chaz prays his heart and prays who he is, and just getting around those people really, really helps you learn and develop that spiritual muscle of prayer, and almost have physical trainers right there with you, right? Just to help you learn how to pray. So that would be this Tuesday at 7 o'clock.
Awesome. Hey, real quick in closing, there's a wonderful book, and I wish I could remember it. I will find it and post it, but it's by a lady named Nancy Ortberg. Her husband's John Ortberg, writes a lot of books. She wrote one, and I actually talking about Darren's like, if you're ready for this, you know, he like Beyonce. I don't know if you're ready, but anyway, it's a real simple book, but it's an awesome book on prayer. And one of the things she said is that she always felt bad that everybody else was having these experiences except her. And then she realized it wasn't about the experience. It was just about being with God. But I'll try to find that book. But it's a real simple read, the way she writes it. But Nancy Ortberg, look for that for a real basic, simple, real life prayer book. And it's by a woman, and it's kind of slanted that way, but it's good for both. I mean, it really is good. So guys, call to prayer this Tuesday. We hope to see you all out. Remember, if you're talking to somebody that don't have electronics, they can call in. There's a number there to dial into. So we hope to see you all on Tuesday. Congregational meeting next Sunday. Check out the how you can celebrate Holy Week or Palm this week on our YouTube, and we will see you soon. God bless. Have a great night.
Thank you, guys.